Shaggy was a name that echoed with fear and notoriety across the Bariga and Shomolu areas of Lagos State. Known on the streets as a tough and feared figure, Shaggy was not just any street hustler, he was a powerful leader within the Black Axe group, commanding influence over both criminal circles and the underworld networks that operated in those parts of the city. Born into a prominent family, Shaggy's background stood in stark contrast to the path he chose in life. His father was a respected chief in their local community, part of a chieftaincy family that held a good reputation among elders and traditional leaders. Yet, despite this privileged background, Shaggy took a different road, one that led him into the heart of street crime and violence. Even as a child, Shaggy was known for getting into trouble. Neighbors would often whisper about how he started small, stealing from local traders, picking pockets in crowded markets, and sneaking away with items that didn't belong to him. As time went on, the crimes escalated. He joined a group of older boys involved in serious criminal activities. Before long, Shaggy had transformed from a common street thief into a full-blown gang leader, organizing operations that targeted unsuspecting victims and rival groups alike. Though the exact year Shaggy became a member of the Black Axe confraternity remained unclear, what was certain was that his rise within the group was swift and brutal. His name became a symbol of dread. Even those who didn't know him personally had heard the stories, tales of his daring operations, the way he handled confrontations, and how he seemed untouchable for years. But life on the street doesn't always remain smooth. In what seemed like another regular operation, Shaggy and some of his trusted men planned a major robbery. However, this time, things didn't go as expected. The operation failed badly. The group was intercepted, arrested, and taken into custody by the police. It was a turning point. After a long trial, Shaggy and his crew were sentenced and sent to prison. They spent several years behind bars, away from the streets they once ruled. When Shaggy finally regained his freedom and returned to Bariga, he quickly discovered that the world he left behind had changed. The street no longer feared him the way it used to. A new generation had risen, with new leaders and fresh power structures. Even more upsetting for Shaggy was the realization that many of the territories and resources he once controlled had now been taken over by others. One particular issue bothered him deeply. Before he went to prison, there was a certain location in Bariga where sand was being extracted and sold. The area was naturally sandy, and truck drivers often came there to load sand for construction and other commercial uses. It was a steady source of money, and back in the day, Shaggy and his men had controlled that spot with an iron grip. They collected tolls, determined who could load sand, and made good money from it. But now, everything had changed. A different group of young men had taken over the site. They were running things their own way and making profits without showing any respect or acknowledgement to Shaggy's former authority. These new players were not interested in sharing the proceeds or offering any form of tribute. To Shaggy, it was a direct insult and a threat to his status. He felt pushed aside, ignored, and disrespected in the very land he once ruled. And Shaggy, known for never backing down from a challenge, made up his mind there would be a confrontation. He would not sit back and watch his past be erased. Something had to be done, and he was going to take back what he believed was rightfully his. The area of Bariga where sand was sold had grown into a booming business over the years. It attracted dozens of heavy-duty trucks and buyers almost every day, each coming to load sand for different construction projects across Lagos. But this sand didn't just lie in the open for anyone to take, it was under the firm control of a group known as the Downtown Boys. The Downtown Boys were not just any group of street youths. Most of them were strongly affiliated with the Airlord confraternity, a rival group to the Black Axe, which Shaggy belonged to. They were feared in the area and operated with a kind of unity that made them difficult to confront directly. They dressed boldly, moved together, and had influence in places that mattered in the streets. The leader of this group was a man called Shola Eku. Shola was not just a leader by name, he had earned his position through a reputation built on countless confrontations and street loyalty. Everyone in Bariga and beyond had heard of him. Shaggy, after regaining his freedom and realizing that his old base of power had been overtaken by this new force, grew restless. To him, it was more than just a matter of money, it was a matter of pride and respect. He had ruled that part of town for years, and he was not ready to take a back seat while another group sat comfortably on a source of income he once controlled. After some consultations with his close allies, Shaggy made up his mind: the downtown boys had to go. Rather than going straight into a clash, Shaggy decided to approach the situation with some caution. He sent word out to Shola Eku for a meeting. The goal, at least on the surface, was to negotiate a way forward. Shaggy wanted them to discuss how both groups could share the earnings from the sand business fairly, without unnecessary violence. Shola accepted the invitation, and a meeting was arranged. The meeting took place in a discreet spot, not too public, but not entirely hidden either. Members from both groups were present. Tension hung heavy in the air from the very beginning. Though both parties tried to stay calm, it was obvious that neither side was willing to back down or give up any control. Shola and his downtown boys had been in charge of the site for some time and were making good money. They felt no need to share. On the other hand, Shaggy believed he was entitled to a significant portion of the profit, if not complete control. As the discussion went on, voices grew louder. Accusations flew across the room. Both groups were overwhelmed with greed, and pride kept them from making any compromise. It was clear the meeting was going nowhere. The final straw came when one of the downtown boys, a tough and well-known member who went by the nickname Biscuit, suddenly rose from his seat and smashed a bottle on Shaggy's head. Chaos broke out immediately. Tables were kicked over, fists flew, and both groups clashed briefly before scattering from the scene. No agreement had been reached. Instead, the meeting had turned into a personal attack, and Shaggy left the scene bleeding, humiliated, and filled with rage. Back at his hideout, Shaggy sat in silence for a while. His wound had been quickly treated, but his pride was deeply hurt. He could still feel the sting, not just from the broken bottle, but from the insult. Biscuit had crossed the line, and in Shaggy's mind, that kind of disrespect could not go unanswered. Without wasting time, Shaggy picked up his phone and called his trusted second-in-command, a fierce and loyal man who went by the name Anaki. Anaki wasn't just any ordinary gang member, he was known for his readiness to act, and for his deep loyalty to Shaggy and the Black Axe cause. Within a short time, Anaki arrived with a number of other Black Axe members, tough-looking men who had fought side by side with Shaggy in the past. They didn't waste time talking. Orders were given, and their target was clear: find Biscuit. Their search didn't take long. Later that evening, they got word that Biscuit had been spotted near a popular joint in the neighborhood, together with one of his close allies, a fellow downtown boy named Ibrahim. Both men were known to always move together, especially when tension was high. But on this night, things took an unexpected turn. As soon as the Black Axe group arrived at the location, Ibrahim quickly sensed danger. He saw the seriousness in the eyes of the approaching men and didn't wait to confirm what they wanted. Acting purely on instinct, he took off running and managed to escape through a back route. Biscuit, on the other hand, was not so lucky, or perhaps, he was too bold. He chose to stand his ground. Maybe he underestimated the seriousness of the situation. Maybe he believed his reputation would be enough to protect him. But Shaggy's men showed no hesitation. They rushed him. The attack was swift and brutal, and right there, Biscuit was overwhelmed and brought down. News of the attack spread fast around Bariga. It was now clear to everyone that the battle for control of the sand site was far from over. The streets were heating up once again, and for Shaggy, this was just the beginning. After the incident that led to the fall of Biscuit, the word on the street spread like wildfire: Shaggy had struck again. People whispered his name in fear and respect. Some said the downtown boys had fled from the sand-loading area in Bariga, unable to match the firepower and determination of Shaggy and his loyal Black Axe members. Others claimed they had simply chosen to lie low after Biscuit's downfall, not wanting to risk another direct clash with a man who had already proven that he wasn't afraid of confrontation. The streets were buzzing. Old shop owners and market women shook their heads as they spoke about the return of the old regime, the days when Shaggy controlled the area and ruled with a kind of authority that left no room for disobedience. For many, it felt like a return to the past, when the Black Axe movement under Shaggy's leadership had dominated that part of Lagos. Standing firmly by Shaggy's side during this period of renewed power was his right-hand man, Anaki. Just hearing his name sent shivers down the spine of many. Unlike most street enforcers, Anarchy was feared not only because of his strength but also because of his reputation for being unpredictable. People said that Anarchy had been involved in several violent crimes and robberies across different parts of Lagos. His name had long been listed among those wanted by the police. He was considered highly dangerous and extremely difficult to capture. One story that stood out in the memory of many locals took place in 2016, during the solar holiday. According to those who were there, Anarchy had gone to a nearby market with his boys to collect a ram. It was something he was known for, showing up during festive seasons to demand animals or money from traders. But on that particular day, things took an unexpected turn. After collecting the ram, Anarchy became greedy. He decided to demand more than just meat. He and his crew began moving from store to store, forcefully taking money from market traders, causing panic and confusion. What he didn't know was that plainclothes police officers had already been patrolling the market that day. They had received previous reports about his activities, and this time, they were prepared. As soon as the officers saw what was happening, they swung into action. A confrontation broke out in the middle of the busy market. It was chaotic, shouts filled the air, people ran in different directions, and some even shut down their stores to avoid getting caught in the middle. The police chased after Anarchy and his men, and what began as a confrontation quickly turned into a full-blown shootout. Anarchy, bold as always, didn't back down. He fought back with all he had. But this time, things didn't go his way. The police were better armed and had backup on standby. In the heat of the exchange, Anarchy was brought down. Some sources claimed that Shaggy, who was allegedly nearby during the incident, was also caught up in the clash. According to this version of the story, he too was brought down by the police during the same encounter. Though the details around Shaggy's fate remained unclear for a while, rumors spread quickly that both him and Anarchy had lost their lives that day. For the Black Axe members in Bariga and Shomolu, the loss was devastating. Shaggy had been more than a leader, he was a symbol of strength, a man who had fought for territory and respect. Anarchy, on the other hand, had been his enforcer, the one who carried out plans and ensured discipline among their ranks. Losing both men in one incident felt like a fatal blow. Their presence had kept rivals in check. Now that they were gone, the structure began to shake. Back on the other side, the downtown boys were celebrating. With Shaggy and Anarchy out of the way, the area was open for them to reclaim. Ibrahim, who had barely escaped during Biscuit's last confrontation, now stood tall among his peers. They marched back into the sand-loading area and resumed operations like nothing had ever happened. Business picked up again, and the money began flowing steadily into their hands. The joy didn't stop there. The downtown boys, made up mostly of Airlord confraternity members, now had complete control over the sand-loading site without competition. For them, it was a victory not just in business, but in pride. Their two biggest threats had been removed, one by a bottle, the other by the law. But the story didn't end there. Members of the Black Axe who were still around were not happy. They couldn't believe that both Shaggy and Anarchy had been lost so suddenly. In their view, it wasn't just coincidence, it was betrayal. Whispers started making their way through the underground circles. Many began to suspect that the downtown boys had something to do with the police showing up that day. Some believed that someone from the Airlord side had secretly tipped off the authorities, setting up Shaggy and Anarchy for elimination. This belief sparked a fire in the hearts of those left in the Black Axe. They refused to let the matter rest. To them, it was not just about leadership, it was about revenge. A call for payback echoed through their ranks. Something had to be done, and they were determined to make sure the downtown boys felt the same kind of pain. The streets of Bariga were on edge once again. People feared that another round of violence was about to erupt. The authorities increased their presence in the area, but those who knew how these things worked understood one simple truth: once blood is spilled, it is rarely forgotten. The days following the fall of Shaggy and his second-in-command, Anarchy, were filled with tension and quiet plotting. While the downtown boys celebrated what they believed to be the final collapse of their biggest threat, the remaining members of the Black Axe confraternity were nursing anger and planning revenge. To them, the events that led to the downfall of their leaders were not accidents. They were calculated moves, and the one person who stood out in all of it was Ibrahim, Biscuit's close ally and fellow Air Lord member. On the day Biscuit was attacked by Shaggy's squad, Ibrahim had been with him. He had managed to escape that day, but the Black Axe believed he knew more than he let on. Some believed he was one of the key figures who had given information to the authorities, which eventually led to Shaggy and Anarchy being caught off guard by the police. Fueled by suspicion, bitterness, and a desire for vengeance, the Black Axe hit squad launched an operation. It was silent, swift, and calculated. One afternoon, they arrived on a motorcycle, a method commonly used to avoid suspicion and escape quickly in busy Lagos streets. Their target was clear: Ibrahim. They spotted him walking along a quiet street in Bariga, unaware of the danger approaching. Without warning, the men advanced and opened fire on him. The moment was loud and chaotic. Nearby residents scattered in panic. Ibrahim was hit, but somehow, he managed to flee the scene despite his wounds. He ran through narrow alleys, holding on to life with every step. Eventually, he found his way to a local hospital. Bleeding and in pain, he pleaded for help. But like many hospitals in Nigeria, they refused to treat him without an official police report, a common policy meant to discourage criminal elements from receiving anonymous medical care. Time passed, and Ibrahim, growing weaker by the hour, sought help from several other clinics. But none were willing to take him in under those circumstances. Days later, his condition worsened. The wounds, left untreated for too long, had become fatal. Ibrahim died quietly, without justice or closure. For the Black Axe, it was a mission accomplished. For the Air Lords, it was a painful loss of one of their strong members. And for the community, it was another reminder that the cycle of violence was far from over. But the streets weren't given much time to heal. Not long after Ibrahim's death, a new conflict broke out between the two rival groups once again, this time, not over control of territory or revenge, but over money. A well-known politician in the area had given out funds, possibly in an attempt to gain street loyalty or maintain some form of political influence. The money was meant to be shared among different youth groups, but as always, greed and mistrust came into play. The Air Lords, being the dominant force at the time, decided to keep the money for themselves. They shared it only among their members, cutting off the Black Axe completely. The move was seen as a deliberate insult, one that could not be ignored. Words were exchanged, threats were made, and very quickly, tempers boiled over into yet another clash. This fresh fracas erupted in the same Bariga area that had already seen too much bloodshed. The confrontation was fierce and intense. Both groups took to the streets in an open display of anger. People once again ran for cover. Businesses closed early. Schools and shops shut their doors to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. During the chaos, the leader of the Black Axe in that zone was captured by a group of Air Lord members. What followed was brutal. They attacked him, not with weapons, but with stones and other objects they could find. The scene was disturbing, one that left a permanent mark in the memory of those who witnessed it. The Black Axe leader succumbed to the assault, marking yet another tragic loss in a chain of endless retaliation. The atmosphere in Bariga became one of fear and silence. Parents warned their children to avoid certain areas. Youths began to rethink the paths they were following. Community elders called for meetings, and some religious leaders began holding prayer sessions, begging for peace to return to their land. But beyond the pain, one message rang louder than ever before. This is what cultism brings: destruction, division, death. What started as a fight over control and pride had now turned into a cycle of pain, revenge, and endless sorrow. Friends became enemies. Families lost their sons. Futures were cut short. Let this be a lesson. Say no to cultism. It doesn't end with power. It doesn't end with wealth. It ends in prison, pain, or even the grave. Choose peace. Choose purpose. And walk away from any path that leads to destruction.